The floorboard under my bed in that old Houston house had always been a time capsule: old love notes, crumpled dollar bills from middle school jobs, a silver bracelet my grandmother gave me. But when I lifted it, that $17,200 just disappeared. My chest didn't tighten the way I expected. Instead, everything went very, very quiet. That's when I realized something in me had already made a decision I didn't know I was making. Let me back up, because this story isn't just about stolen money. It's about what happens when someone you love teaches you that rescue is the same thing as love, and what happens when you finally stop believing that lie. I'm going to be honest with you from the start. I'm not the hero of this story. Neither is my sister. The real hero is the moment we both stopped running from hard truth. And I need to tell you why that matters. Because if you've ever been the person who fixes everything, who shows up, who swallows your own needs to smooth over someone else's chaos, this story is going to hit different. Growing up in Houston with my parents felt like living inside a well-oiled machine. My dad worked warehouse management for one of the petrochemical companies, the kind of job that meant early mornings and a steady paycheck but not much room for spontaneity. My mom was a middle school counselor, which meant she spent her days talking other people's kids through their problems and came home too tired to notice ours were brewing. The house was on the northwest side, nothing fancy, 3-bedroom ranch, a driveway where my dad washed his Chevy every Sunday, a backyard with a pool my parents had saved 7 years to afford. We weren't poor, but we weren't rich either. We were the thing my parents took pride in being: reliable, steady, the kind of family where everyone knew their lane and stayed in it. Except, I had a sister, Madison. She was 4 years younger, and from the moment she was born, the entire gravitational pull of our household shifted like the earth had tilted on its axis. She had this ability, I'm not exaggerating, to make adults reorganize their priorities around her. Teachers would bend grading policies. Our neighbor Mr. Chen would mow our yard twice a month because Madison had cried about the grass being too tall. My own father, this man who never raised his voice, turned into someone who remembered her preferred coffee order before he remembered his own. And me? I became something different too. By the time I was 16 and working after school at a Whole Foods in Memorial, I understood the unspoken rule of our family. My job was to want less so Madison could have more. When I asked for a used laptop, Dad said I'd have to work and save. When Madison asked for a new laptop a year later, brand new, the expensive model, it appeared in her room one morning like magic, a present for maintaining her grades. I knew the subtext. Hard work was a character-building exercise for me. For Madison, it was unnecessary. She was the kind of person things happened for. The worst part wasn't the unfairness, though there was plenty of that. It was that by the time I turned 22 and moved to Houston for my first real job, I'd internalized that our family's equilibrium depended on me being the one who absorbed the friction. I took a position as a technical project manager at a mid-sized software development firm downtown, the kind of job that came with decent pay, long hours, and the kind of responsibility that makes you feel like you're building something. Madison was in her second year at the University of Houston, studying business management, which my parents assured me would really open doors for her. That was 3 years ago. The doors kept opening. I kept walking through them first, checking for sharp edges. Everything changed the way these things always do, not with a single moment but with a pattern you don't notice until it's too late to untangle. When Madison's tuition bill came due at the beginning of that October semester, my parents sat me down at our kitchen table, the one my mom had refinished herself a decade ago. My dad looked tired in a new way, the kind of tired that comes from realizing you've miscalculated something important. Turns out the warehouse had downsized. He'd been laid off 2 months prior, something he'd kept to himself while he figured out the next move, which meant taking contract work at significantly lower pay. My mom's school district had frozen hiring for counselor positions, so she'd been tutoring privately, squeezing teenagers into our living room on weekends. The math wasn't adding up anymore. They were maybe 6-7 months away from real financial stress. And then came the question. They asked it so carefully, like they were handling something fragile. Could I help with Madison's tuition? Just this semester. Just to get us over the hump. They'd been saving. Of course they had. But between the mortgage and my father's medical issues starting to flare up, and Madison's tuition was already astronomical for a private university that she'd insisted on attending. I remember my mom's face when she asked me. Not guilt, exactly, something smaller and more complicated. Like she was asking me to carry a weight she knew was too heavy but had no one else to give it to. I said yes before I'd even finished thinking about it. That was the pattern, after all. When someone in our family needed something, I moved toward it like a compass needle finding north. $17,200. I wasn't making bad money, but I wasn't making pay someone's entire tuition money either. I had a down payment fund for an apartment I wanted to rent in Midtown, money I'd been saving since I started working. I had a vacation planned to Costa Rica with friends. I had this idea that maybe, just maybe, I could build a life that wasn't constructed entirely around other people's needs. But I looked at my mom's tired face, and I looked at my dad's jaw tightening with shame, and I pulled the money out of my savings account. All of it. $17,200, converted to cash because Madison had some theory about it being easier to manage physical money than numbers on a screen. She helped me hide it in that floorboard beneath my childhood bed, the one I still used when I visited home on weekends. When she hugged me, she held on tight, and she said, "You're the best sister anyone could have." I believed her. For approximately 8 days, everything felt normal. There were family dinners where my parents laughed again, where Madison showed us her class schedule and talked about her group project, where the house felt like a place where people actually lived instead of just existed. But normalcy has a shelf life, and mine was about to expire. 3 days before Madison's tuition payment was due to the university, I had to travel to Seattle for a work conference. Just 3 days back Sunday night. No big deal. I'd planned to come home, go straight to the bank Monday morning with Madison, make the transfer, done. On my way out the door, I reminded her that it was time. She was humming in the kitchen, coffee in hand, dressed in one of those oversized sweaters that somehow cost $70 but looked like it came from a thrift store. She turned to me with that smile, the one that had always gotten her out of trouble since childhood, and she said, "Don't worry about it. I've got everything under control." I should have asked her what that meant. I didn't. Seattle was the kind of conference that eats your brain 8 hours of PowerPoint presentations, networking dinners where everyone talked about disruption and scaling, hotel coffee that tastes like someone boiled cardboard. But I remember standing in the Seattle-Tacoma airport on Sunday evening, thinking about how excited I felt to come home, to help my sister start her semester, to know that I'd done something tangible to help my family stay afloat. I imagined how good it would feel to finally solve something. That thought died the moment I walked through the front door of my parents' house. The air smelled wrong. Expensive perfume, the kind I didn't own, the kind Madison had mentioned in passing wanting. A Byredo fragrance, something that cost $90 a bottle. The house was too quiet, too clean. Like someone had hired someone else to make it look like a family still lived there. My parents were already asleep. Dad's light was off, and Mom's bedroom door was closed. I stood in the hallway wondering why everything felt so off, like a painting that's been shifted 1 inch to the left and suddenly nothing makes sense. I didn't sleep that night, not because of suspicion exactly, but because something in my nervous system was screaming. By 6 in the morning, I was in my old bedroom, on my knees, my fingers on that floorboard. It lifted easier than I expected. The envelope was still there, sitting exactly where I'd left it, but it weighed almost nothing. When I opened it, I already knew what I would find. Nothing. Just air. The manila opening was empty, except for a deposit receipt I'd kept from the bank, $17,200, in and out. And then there was another receipt, crisp and new, pressed into the corner. A deposit receipt in Madison's name. $19,000. She'd somehow deposited money just days after stealing mine. My hands started shaking, but not with anger. With something colder and much more dangerous. Clarity. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just sat there on the carpet of my childhood bedroom, dust on my palms, my heartbeat steady in my ears, and I started checking. Bathroom trash first, a hunch that paid off immediately. Receipt after receipt. Nordstrom. Saks Fifth Avenue. Neiman Marcus. A shoe store in the Uptown area, called something pretentious, that probably employed 3 people, and served lattes that cost more than most people's rent. The dates were all the same, the 3 days I was in Seattle. The totals were staggering. $800, $1,200, $1,900. She'd gone on the kind of shopping spree that required logistical planning, that required knowing exactly what designer items she wanted before she walked into each store. Then I opened Instagram on my phone specifically, the account I'd created senior year of high school, ostensibly to follow my own life, but really to keep watch on Madison since she'd blocked me years ago, when I'd apparently commented something too critical on one of her photos. I wasn't proud of having that account, but in that moment, I was grateful for it. Her latest post made my stomach go tight. A carousel of shopping bags spread across a bed that definitely wasn't her dorm room bed. A better bed. A bed that was in someone else's apartment, probably someone's actual adult apartment. The caption: making up for lost time with my favorite humans. Why be your authentic self when you can be your best self? Another photo showed her wrist a gold watch. Not costume jewelry, real gold. The kind of watch that costs more than 3 months of my rent. Another video. Her laughing in a restaurant, her head thrown back, designer sunglasses pushed into her hair, the kind of effortless wealthy-looking aesthetic that takes money to achieve. I was still processing all of this when my phone buzzed. A text from Jackson, an old roommate from my first apartment after college. Yo, I saw your sister at Melange last night. Girl was spending money like she hit the lottery or something. Buying everyone drinks, ordered like 3 appetizers, didn't even look at the bill. Everything good? I stared at that text for a very long time. Here's what I want you to understand before I tell you what happened next. I wasn't angry in that moment. This is important. I was past anger. Anger is an emotion that requires you to feel some kind of shock. I wasn't shocked. Some part of me had seen this coming, the way you can sometimes sense a storm before the clouds actually appear. My sister had never learned how to want something without getting it. She had never learned that the word no was a complete sentence. She had never been allowed to sit with disappointment long enough for it to teach her anything. And now she'd stolen from the one person in the family who had consistently chosen her over herself, and she was celebrating it on social media like it was an accomplishment. The decision I made in that moment wasn't made out of anger. It was made out of something much more powerful, love twisted into shape by years of erosion. I was going to let her fail, completely, spectacularly, without rescue. When Madison came home around 2 o'clock that afternoon, I was sitting in the living room with a cup of cold coffee and all the receipts spread out on the coffee table like a jigsaw puzzle of her betrayal. I heard her key in the lock, that familiar jangle of keys that meant someone was entering as if the world still revolved around them. I heard shopping bags, multiple shopping bags, their plastic rustling against each other in that specific way that told me she'd been shopping again, even today, even knowing tuition was due. I heard her heels on the tile, those expensive heels that cost money I'd never spent on myself in one item. She appeared in the doorway of the living room, cheeks flushed, hair glossy like she'd come from somewhere that had good lighting and possibly professional styling. 4 designer bags hung from her wrists like weapons. That gold watch caught the afternoon light, and I watched it gleam. For a second, confusion flickered across her face, genuine confusion that I was home, that I was here, that I wasn't in Seattle. Oh, hey, I thought you weren't back until tonight, she said, and her voice had that careful quality it always got when she was about to try to manipulate a situation. How was Seattle? Productive, I said, and I watched her eyes dart to the receipts. I actually wrapped up early. Got home last night. Cool, cool. Her laugh was exactly the wrong note. Nervous, thin, the laugh of someone who was starting to understand that the ground beneath them wasn't quite as solid as they'd thought. How was the weather? Surprisingly nice, I said. I closed my laptop slowly. I wanted her to have time to realize what was happening. But it looks like you've had a busy few days too. She glanced down at the shopping bags as if seeing them for the first time, as if she didn't remember acquiring them, as if they'd just materialized on her wrists through no action of her own. Oh, this? End of season sales. You know, bargains. I've been working on my wardrobe. I picked up the receipt from Saks, the one for the designer handbag. Huh. I didn't know they had 70% off at Gucci. Silence. The kind of silence that has weight. She stared at me, really stared at me for maybe the first time in years, and something shifted in her face. Not guilt exactly. Realization. The moment when a person understands that the person they're looking at isn't going to react the way they always have. That the script they've been following for their entire life has suddenly been rewritten. You went through my things, she said, and her voice had turned small. Not apologetic, just small. Bathroom trash, I corrected. Shared space. Family space. She dropped the shopping bags on the floor. They made a sound like defeat, I was going to pay you back. The entire envelope? Some of it. I mean, you make good money, Sarah. You don't even notice $17,000. She was talking faster now, her hands moving, her eyes darting toward the hallway like she was calculating whether she could run. It's not like you'll miss it. I just wanted to feel normal for once. Everyone at school has nice things. I'm tired of being the poor one. You weren't poor, I said quietly. My voice was so calm it sounded like it belonged to someone else. You were helped. There's a difference. Please. Tears started now, and I couldn't tell if they were real or if she learned to cry on command the way some people learn calculus. Please don't tell Mom and Dad. They'll be so angry. I'll return everything. I swear. I'll just return it all and we can pretend this never happened. I let the silence sit. No yelling. No threats. No performance of anger. Just the weight of what she'd done hanging between us like humidity. Madison, I said finally, and her head jerked up at the sound of her name. Monday is tuition deadline. Dad's expecting confirmation that the payment went through. She blinked. Once. Twice. Like she was trying to interpret a sentence in a language she didn't quite speak. You're not. She stopped. Start it again. You're not going to pay it again? No. What? Her voice cracked the way glass does before it shatters. Sarah, you can't be serious. You can't just. I worked hard for my grades. I deserve to be in that program. That's not fair. This is where I want to stop and be honest with you watching this. Because what she said about fairness that would have worked on me 6 months ago. 6 months ago, I would have immediately started restructuring my budget, looking for ways to make this work, explaining to myself that the money didn't matter as much as her future did. But something had shifted inside me the moment I saw that empty envelope. Some part of me had matured right there on that dusty bedroom floor and realized that I had been making a catastrophic mistake, that I had been loving her in a way that wasn't love at all, that I had been participating in something that was going to destroy both of us if I didn't stop. Everyone at school has nice things, I said. Everyone at school, not just you. The difference is, everyone at school earned them or their parents earned them. You stole yours. And I'm not fixing that for you. What happened next was the kind of emotional storm that only happens when someone's entire framework for how the world works gets demolished. She cycled through every manipulation tactic I'd seen her deploy since childhood. First came the begging raw, honest begging. The kind that would have worked when I was 17, and she was 13, and I still thought my job was to make her pain stop. Then came the anger accusations that I was jealous, that I'd always wanted to bring her down, that I was being cruel and selfish. Then came the self-recrimination. I'm so stupid, I'm the worst, I deserve this, which was actually the most dangerous because it would have triggered my need to comfort her, to tell her she wasn't so bad, to start the entire rescue cycle over again. But I just stood there, watching her burn through every manipulation tactic like matches lighting one after another. And when she finally ran out of words, when she finally understood that none of it was working, she looked genuinely small for the first time in years. You always fix everything, she whispered. You always come through. Not anymore, I said. And I turned away, letting her tears fall behind me where I couldn't see them. Sunday morning in my parents' house felt too quiet, too clean, like the air itself was holding its breath before everything changed. My mom was making eggs the way she did every Sunday, sunny side up, with toast that she buttered while it was still hot enough to make the butter slide into all the crevices. My dad was scrolling through his tablet, probably reading the news, trying to ignore the tension that had been threading through the house since yesterday. Madison sat across from me in silence, her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee that she wasn't actually drinking, her eyes fixed on something just above my head. Big day tomorrow, my dad said. More to the room than to anyone specifically. We'll go to campus and get that tuition payment processed. Madison made a sound that might have been agreement or might have been a whimper. I wasn't sure anymore. Then the landline rang. This old phone that sits in my parents' kitchen, the one nobody really uses except for official business. My mom reached for it with that automatic gesture she'd perfected over decades of being reachable, always responsible. Hello? She said. And then I watched her face change. Yes, this is she. Overdue? Since when? Of course she's my. How late? She handed the phone to my dad without another word. I watched him listen, his expression hardening like concrete setting. Yes, I understand the policy. A late fee, obviously. Today? You can't give us until. I understand. He hung up slowly, like each second took deliberate effort. The kitchen went absolutely still. Not quiet. Still. The kind of still that happens before weather turns dangerous. Madison. My father's voice had transformed into something I'd rarely heard before. Not angry exactly, but the vocal equivalent of a door slamming. The $17,000. The tuition. What happened to it? Madison froze. I watched her try to calculate if lying was still possible. If some version of denial could still work. It couldn't. And she knew it. What? I don't. Your school just called, my mother said, and her voice was shaking in a way that almost made me lose my resolve. Almost. They said tuition hasn't been paid. They said it's been due since Friday. That there's a late fee. That if it's not paid today, they're pulling you from your classes. I don't. Madison looked at me. Actually looked at me, searching my face for something, maybe permission, maybe forgiveness, maybe just evidence that I was going to step in and fix this the way I always had. I didn't move. I didn't look away. The money, I said quietly. It's gone. Gone? My mom's voice came out small. Sarah, what do you mean gone? I left it in my room before I went to Seattle. When I checked yesterday, the envelope was empty. My father turned to Madison with a slowness that somehow felt worse than if he'd raised his voice. Tell me it wasn't you. Madison's hands were shaking. I could see it from across the table. That's when I knew she was actually feeling something real. Something that couldn't be manipulated or performance adjusted. I borrowed some. I was going to put it back. How much? My father's jaw was locked. All of it, she whispered. The silence that followed was the kind of silence that shatters families or remakes them. I wasn't sure yet which one this was going to be. My mom's hands started trembling. She set down her coffee mug like she was afraid it might explode. My father leaned forward, and I could see him processing not the theft itself, but what the theft meant. What kind of person he'd inadvertently raised. What kind of family we'd been constructing. Brick by brick, favor by favor, rescue by rescue. You stole money, he said finally. Your sister's money. Money she gave you specifically for your education. And you spent it. I didn't mean to, Madison said. And the way she said it like meaning was the problem. Like intention was what mattered more than consequence made something in me go cold. I just wanted to feel normal. Everyone has things. Nice things. My mother made a sound that wasn't quite a sob and wasn't quite a laugh. Not at the cost of your family, she said quietly. I reached across the table and slid the receipts into the center. Every single one. The Saks, the Nordstrom, the boutiques, the restaurants. 3 days of spending that added up to nearly the entire amount she'd stolen. You didn't just spend it, I said. You flaunted it. Instagram, shopping bags, that watch. You bought it all while pretending you didn't know where it came from. Madison's voice shook. I was ashamed. I hated being the one without things. I hate it. My father's anger cracked into disappointment, which somehow looked worse on his face. You don't fix insecurity with theft. You fix it by confronting yourself. By growing up, Madison started crying, not the manipulative tears from yesterday, but something raw and real and frightening. Please, she said, please don't tell the school. Don't call. I'll fix it. I'll find a way. I stood. Then start. Call them. Right now. Her head jerked up. What? Call the school. Tell them you can't make the payment. Sarah, please. You know what happens if I don't pay. They'll pull me out. They'll probably put it on my record. I'll have to withdraw. I won't be able to go back until I've sorted this out. Yes, I said. She looked at my mother. My mother didn't move. She looked at my father. He was looking at me. And I saw something in his eyes shift recognition, maybe, that his oldest daughter had just done something that required more courage than he'd given her credit for. Madison's hand trembled as she reached for her phone. As she scrolled to the university's number. As she took a breath, Hi, this is Madison Wilson calling about my tuition payment. I'm unable to make my payment today. Yes, I understand that means withdrawal from my classes. I understand that I'll be removed if it's not paid by the end of business today. No, I don't have the funds. Yes, okay, thank you. Her tears fell fast as she hung up. Her voice was barely a whisper. They said I'm officially withdrawn. that I have to reapply for the spring semester and provide proof that I can pay. They said they're pulling me from all 4 of my classes effective immediately. My father nodded. The gesture wasn't forgiving, it was just factual, accepting. Then that's what happens. You'll work, you'll repay this money, you'll live with the consequences of your choices. You're really going to let me fail? Madison gasped. Just like that? After everything? After all the money you and Mom spent on me? You chose to fail the moment you stole the money, my mother said quietly. We're just not going to pretend that failure didn't happen. Madison turned to me, and I could see her searching for the person I'd always been, the older sister who arranged her pain and made it fit into a more comfortable shape. But that person wasn't here anymore. That person had died somewhere between that empty envelope and the receipts from Saks Fifth Avenue. Everything you bought, my father said. You're going to return it. What you can't return, you'll sell. What I can't sell? Madison's voice cracked. That's your problem to solve, he said simply. That afternoon, we made the loop. Every store, every return counter. Madison walked through that Nordstrom in Uptown, wearing her designer clothes, her gold watch, looking like someone who still thought luxury was her birthright, and walked out with store credit that she couldn't use because her father had been very clear. Cash only. No exceptions. Neiman Marcus. More cash back, but less than she'd spent. Saks. Even worse. A boutique where the owner knew who my father was, recognized us, and gave Madison a look that I'd never seen directed at her before. Pity. Not for her circumstances, but for the fact that she'd apparently thought no one was watching when she decided to steal. By dusk, we'd recovered maybe a fraction of what she'd spent. Certainly not all 17,000. Not even close. The gold watch, the one that had seemed so important yesterday, so essential to her identity, sat on my mother's kitchen counter, gleaming under the overhead light. Madison stared at it like it was the last thing connecting her to the person she'd believed herself to be. They won't take it back, she said softly. I tried. They said jewelry can't be returned once it's been worn. My father looked at it for a long moment. Then you'll sell it online. eBay, Poshmark, wherever. You'll take whatever you get for it, and you'll keep the money. Starting tomorrow, you're going to find a job. Entry level, doesn't matter what. Coffee shop, retail, warehouse, I don't care. You're going to work, and every dollar you earn is going to go toward repaying your sister. Madison's eyes shifted to me, searching for something. Compassion, permission. Any indication that I was going to step in. I met her eyes without flinching. You're not going to help me, are you? She asked. I already did, I said. And I meant it. You just didn't see it. That night, she slipped a note under my bedroom door. Just a single piece of notebook paper, folded in half. I almost didn't read it, but I did. I know you're angry. You should be, but I'll make this right, I promise. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. There was $60 taped to the inside of the note, crisp and new, and a handwritten receipt. $60 from concert ticket sales. That was my first payment. I stared at it for a long time. Not with anger, which had burned away. Not with satisfaction, which would have felt cheap. I stared at it with something that felt like the beginning of understanding. That was the beginning of what comes next. 4 weeks later, the sound of the house changed. This is something I don't think people talk about enough, how a family develops an acoustic identity. The rhythm of doors slamming, the frequency of arguments, the tenor of laughter. Our house had always hummed with Madison's demands and my parents' attempts to meet them. Now it hummed with something different. Quiet footsteps at 5 a.m, the sound of a work apron being tied. Madison's car leaving for a job at a cafe downtown before sunrise. The kind of place where people actually worked for minimum wage plus tips, where your value is measured in how fast you moved, and how many customers you could make smile. The first night she came home from her shift, her uniform smelled like espresso and burnt sugar syrup. Her hands were marked with small burns from steam, and her voice was hoarse from talking to customers. She didn't complain. She actually didn't say much of anything. She walked to the kitchen counter where my mother was grading papers, and placed down $72 in cash. Most of it single bills that were crumpled from being clutched in aprons and change pockets. Tips, she said quietly. It's not much, but it's honest. My father looked up from his newspaper, an actual physical newspaper, which told me he was thinking about something important. He nodded. Not warmly, but not coldly either. Factually. Good, he said. Keep going. Every Saturday after that, Madison came home with an envelope. Sometimes it had $140. Sometimes it had less. Maybe 80, if the Saturday had been slow. But it came. Consistent. Real. I didn't count it in front of her. That would have been cruel in a different way. Instead, I'd take the envelope, thank her, and write the total on a note that I pinned to the refrigerator. The number grew slowly, accumulating in the same way water fills a well. Not fast, but inevitably. By November, we'd recovered $8,000. By January, she'd hit $12,000. She wasn't going to pay it all back. That wasn't realistic with cafe income, even generous tips. But the amount wasn't really the point anymore. The point was that she was trying. Actually trying. Not trying to manipulate, not trying to perform, but trying in that quiet, consistent way that real change looks like. Somewhere in October, my mother suggested family therapy. Not as punishment, but as something we all needed. I want to be honest, I was skeptical. Therapy seemed like a bandage on a wound that needed to be exposed to air and healed properly. But I said yes, because by that point I was learning that sometimes the hard thing is also the necessary thing. Dr. Lambert's office was in a converted house in Heights, the kind of place where everything smells like peppermint tea and old books, and the kind of air purifier that's trying very hard to disguise the fact that 40 people cry in here every week. At first, we sat on opposite sides of the room, my parents on one couch, me in a chair, Madison on another couch, each of us as far away as possible. Dr. Lambert just let us sit like that for the first few sessions. She didn't try to force connection. She just asked questions. "Tell me about fairness," she said once, looking at me. I told her about the laptop, about the cheerleading ribbons, about watching my sister get rescues while I got lectures about earning things. And somewhere in the middle of that story, my mother started crying. Not the performative kind, but the kind that comes from realizing that you've made mistakes that affected your children in ways you can't quite undo. I mistook protecting her for loving her, my mother said, and her voice was so small I almost didn't hear it. I thought if I could just make sure she was never disappointed, never struggled, that meant I was a good mother. And I made Sarah into something. I'm not even sure what. A parent to her parents. A safety net. A mate who happened to share our DNA. My father looked at his hands. "I let you do it," he said to my mother. Because it was easier than drawing boundaries. I wanted my kids to be happy. What I didn't understand was that happiness built on someone else's suffering isn't actually happiness. It's just debt. Madison didn't say much in those early sessions. She mostly sat with her hands in her lap, listening to her family articulate all the ways we'd been broken and how we'd broken each other. But one day, maybe a month into therapy, she said something that stopped everyone. "I never learned how to be sorry without expecting someone to fix it for me," she said quietly. "My whole life, someone was always waiting to catch me. And I think I never learned what real consequences felt like, because there were never any real consequences. So I stole the money, and I convinced myself it was okay because Sarah would understand. Because Sarah always understood. Because Sarah was the person who was supposed to absorb all of this." The room went absolutely still. Even Dr. Lambert just sat there with her hands folded, letting the truth hang in the air until it solidified into something solid enough to stand on. "Do you understand now?" Dr. Lambert asked gently. "Yeah," Madison said. "I do. I think I hate understanding it. But I do." By December, something shifted. It wasn't a complete transformation. People don't change in real time. They change incrementally, in moments you don't notice until suddenly you look back and realize you've traveled miles. But Madison had stopped asking for help, which was actually the thing that helped the most. She'd stopped looking at me with those eyes that expected rescue. She'd stopped treating consequences like a temporary inconvenience. She'd started doing the thing that real growth looks like. Showing up, doing the work, accepting that the world didn't revolve around her comfort. One evening, she left another note under my door. This one was longer than the first one. "I know you probably don't want to read anything from me, but I need you to know something. What you did, letting me fail, refusing to fix it, not saving me, that was the most loving thing anyone has ever done for me. I'm not saying that lightly. I'm not trying to convince you that everything's fine now or that we're fixed. We're not. But I'm starting to understand what actual responsibility feels like, what actual consequences feel like. And I'm starting to understand that that's the only thing that will ever teach me anything real. Thank you for not saving me. You taught me how to save myself. That's the kind of love that actually means something. I placed that note on my desk next to the old floorboard. I'd retrieved the one that used to hide childhood secrets and almost destroyed my family. Looking at them together, side by side, I realized something important. That floorboard had been a symbol of secrets, of things hidden, of a family that wasn't honest about its problems until those problems became catastrophic. The note was something else entirely. It was a symbol of what happens when someone is finally allowed to see themselves clearly, to feel the full weight of their choices, and to rebuild from there. By spring semester, Madison had reapplied to the university. She was readmitted with conditions, a payment plan, proof of employment, a schedule that required working part-time while taking a reduced course load. It was harder. Everything was harder. But it was hers in a way it had never been before. She wasn't a student whose tuition was paid for by family sacrifice. She was a student who was working her way through school, just like thousands of other people. Just like I had done, back when I was younger and the world was less complicated. One Saturday in May, she handed me an envelope that was thicker than the others. She'd worked extra shifts all month, she explained. Overtime in the afternoons, doubles on weekends. This is the last of what I can pay toward the original amount, she said. I know it's not everything, but it's as close as I can get without working myself into complete exhaustion. Inside was $3,000 in carefully organized bills. You didn't have to, I started to say. I know, she said. But I wanted to. Because that's different now. She also gave me a small gift bag. Inside was a framed photo of us as kids, both of us, muddy and grinning. My arm around her shoulder in that way that older sisters did when they actually felt protective rather than obligated. It was probably taken sometime in the mid-2000s, back when the distance between us wasn't yet a design feature of our relationship. On the back, Madison had written in careful handwriting, "Thank you for not saving me. You taught me how to save myself." I placed that frame on my desk, right where I could see it every morning. Next to it, I put that old floorboard. Not as a reminder of loss, but as a reminder of the moment everything changed. The moment I chose love over rescue. The moment my sister learned that real support sometimes looks like stepping back and letting someone figure out who they are when you're not there to absorb all the sharp edges. And here's what I want to tell you, because this is the part that matters. Sometimes love isn't the hand that catches you before you fall. Sometimes it's the silence that lets you fall just far enough to learn how to climb. Sometimes it's the boundary. Sometimes it's the refusal. Sometimes it's the person who looks at you and says, "I believe you can do this without me," and means it. If you've ever been in a position where you had to make that choice, whether to keep rescuing someone you love or whether to step back and let them rescue themselves, I want you to know that choice is harder than it looks. I want you to know that people will misunderstand you. People will call you selfish. People will say that real love means endless fixing, endless sacrifice, endless putting yourself aside. Those people are probably people who've been rescued so many times they don't remember what it feels like to earn something. What she understood that nobody else in that room understood when she called the university and withdrew was this: growth requires the space to fail. Transformation requires consequences. Real love requires the willingness to let someone experience the full weight of their choices. Not because you don't care about them, but because you care about them too much to let them stay small and dependent forever. So tell me in the comments, do you agree with what I did? 1, if you think I should have paid it again. 2, if you think I did the right thing. 3, if you're unsure. If you think this is the kind of situation that's more complicated than right and wrong. And while you're thinking about that, tell me where you're watching from. What time is it there? What's your situation? Have you ever had to make the hard choice between rescue and boundaries with someone you love? Drop your story in the comments. I read all of them. But before you go, I need you to do something for me. Please hit that subscribe button. Not because I'm asking for views or trying to grow my channel for vanity reasons, but because if this story meant something to you, if it made you think about your own relationships and your own patterns of rescue and enabling, then you need to hear more stories like this. Stories about growth, stories about hard love, stories about what actually transforms people. I'll be back every week with a new story, and I promise I'll always be honest with you the way I'm being honest with myself. Subscribe if you believe that real love is hard. Subscribe if you believe that boundaries are an act of devotion. Subscribe if you're ready to stop rescuing and start believing in other people's ability to save themselves. This is a fictional story, inspired by real emotional experiences, fully rewritten and reimagined in Houston, Texas to create original content. Any resemblance to real people or events is coincidental.